There are places in this world where the walls remember, where the floors hold secrets that should never be spoken, where the air itself feels thick with something ancient, something that was never meant to walk among the living. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about one such place. But I need you to understand something before we begin. Some stories, once heard, cannot be unheard. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The house stands at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. At least, it used to be called that. They changed the address years ago, hoping that a new number might somehow erase the past. But you cannot change what happened inside those walls. You cannot renumber the rooms where blood soaked into the floorboards. You cannot rename the shadows that still move when no one is watching. This is not a story about ghosts, not really. This is a story about a house that became something else, something that watches, something that waits, something that perhaps still hungers. And the most terrifying part? The house is still there, still standing, still breathing. Picture it now if you dare. It's 3 a.m, the kind of hour when the world feels empty and wrong. The streetlights on Ocean Avenue cast long, trembling shadows across the pavement. And there, set back from the road, surrounded by trees that seem to lean away from it rather than toward it, stands the house. Even in darkness, you can see it. Or perhaps it allows you to see it. The house is a Dutch colonial, built in the style that was popular in the early 20th century. It should look charming. It should look like a family home, warm and inviting. But it doesn't. It never has. The windows. Dear God, the windows. There are 2 of them on the upper floor, positioned perfectly to look like eyes. Not metaphorically. Not if you squint and use your imagination. They look like eyes. Wide, unblinking eyes that stare out at the street with an intelligence that houses should not possess. In the darkness, when the moonlight hits them just right, they seem to glow with a dull, malevolent awareness. Stand outside that house at night. Stand there in the cold, and you'll feel it. Even now, decades after the horror began, you'll feel it watching you. You'll feel the weight of its attention pressing against your chest, making it harder to breathe. Your instincts, those ancient survival mechanisms buried deep in your brain, will scream at you to run, to get away, to never, ever look back. And the front door is painted dark. Wine red, some say. Others insist it's brown or black, depending on the light. But whatever colour it truly is, it looks wrong. Like a mouth, slightly open, waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to approach. The house was built in 1927, nearly 100 years of standing in that same spot, watching the world change around it, watching families come and go, watching children grow up and move away, watching, always watching, through those terrible windows that look like eyes. But the house didn't become what it is because of when it was built. It became what it is because of what happened inside, because of the screams that echoed through its halls, because of the blood that christened its floors, because of the evil that either awakened there or was invited in. No one knows for certain which. Perhaps both are true. Let me describe it to you in more detail. Let me paint a picture so vivid that you can see it in your mind, so clear that you might wish you couldn't. The house sits on a half-acre lot. It's a substantial property, surrounded by other homes that somehow seem smaller in comparison, diminished by the presence of this one building. The exterior is covered in shingles that, depending on whom you ask, are either dark brown or grey, or some colour that exists between the two. Colour seems to shift around this house, as if reality itself cannot quite decide what it's looking at. There's a boathouse. The property backs onto a canal that leads to the Amityville River and then out to the Great South Bay. Water on three sides. In folklore, in the old stories that our ancestors told in the dark, the water was supposed to be a barrier to evil spirits. They cannot cross running water, the legends said. But if that's true, then what does it mean that this house sits surrounded by water? Is it trapped there, contained by the canals and the bay? Or is the water keeping something else out, while what's inside remains free to do as it pleases? The front of the house faces north. There's a semicircular driveway, a front lawn that, in the photographs, always seems slightly too dark, slightly too shadowed, even on bright summer days. The grass grows there, but people who have visited say it feels different, thicker, coarser, as if the earth itself is trying to form a barrier, trying to keep whatever is beneath from pushing through. Inside, the house has 3 floors, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, spaces where a family should live, should laugh, should celebrate birthdays and holidays, and all the small sacred moments that make a house into a home. But those rooms have never felt like home to anyone. Not really. The staircase that leads from the first floor to the second is steep, narrow. In the accounts from those who have been inside, they always mention the stairs. How climbing them feels like ascending into something, some space that exists outside of normal reality. How the temperature drops as you go higher. How the air becomes thicker, harder to breathe, as if you're moving underwater. At the top of those stairs, there's a hallway. And along that hallway are the bedrooms where children once slept, where they pulled their blankets up to their chins and tried to ignore the sounds in the walls, the breathing sounds, on the scratching sounds, the whispers that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The master bedroom is at the end of the hall, the largest room in the house, the room where Ronald DeFeo Sr. and Louise DeFeo slept on the night of November 13th, 1974. The night that changed everything. The room where they were murdered in their bed, shot at close range while they slept. Or did they sleep? Did they wake in those final moments? Did they see what was coming? Did they see their own son standing in the doorway, raising the rifle, taking aim? We'll never know. They can't tell us. The house keeps their final moments locked away in its memory, replaying them perhaps over and over in the long dark hours when no one is watching. The basement. God help us. The basement. Every house has a basement. It's where you store things you don't need very often. Christmas decorations, old furniture, boxes of memories you're not quite ready to throw away. It should be a mundane space, concrete floor, cinder block walls, maybe a little damp, a little musty, but harmless. The basement at 112 Ocean Avenue is not harmless. It's where the Lutz family would later find a small hidden room, painted entirely red. Floor, walls, ceiling, all red. A room that didn't appear on any of the house's blueprints. A room that shouldn't exist. A room that, according to some accounts, was deliberately concealed behind a false wall in the basement, as if whoever built it wanted to hide it, wanted to pretend it wasn't there. What was that room used for? What happened there before the DeFeos, before the Lutzes, in all those decades when the house was still young? Some say it was used for rituals. Others claim it was a punishment room, a place where unspeakable things were done to people who could not escape. The house doesn't answer these questions. It just waits in the dark, keeping its secrets, breathing its slow, patient breaths. And then there's the smell. Everyone who has spent time in that house mentions the smell. It comes and goes without warning. Sometimes it's overwhelming, a stench of decay and rot and something else, something sulphurous and ancient. Other times it's subtle, just a hint of wrongness in the air that makes your stomach turn. The smell doesn't come from anything you can see. There's no source, no dead animal in the walls, no sewage backup, no natural explanation. It's as if the house itself is rotting from the inside. As if the evil that lives there has a scent all its own, and sometimes it decides to let you know it's present. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue. The house with eyes. The house that watches. The house that remembers. It's waiting for us to continue this story. Waiting to show you what happened in November of 1974. Waiting to reveal the darkness that has never left. Are you ready? Are you certain you want to know? Very well. Let's go back. Back to the night when everything changed. Back to the night when a family died and a house became something more than just wood and brick and glass. Ronald DeFeo Sr. was 43 years old. He worked hard. He provided for his family. By all accounts, he was a man who believed in discipline, in order, in control. Some say he was strict, perhaps too strict. Others suggest there was anger in him, a temper that could flash hot and violent. But whatever his flaws, he didn't deserve what happened to him in the early hours of November 13th, 1974. Louise DeFeo was 42. She was described as loving, devoted to her children. She had given birth to 5 of them, 5 souls that she brought into this world, that she nursed and raised and loved with everything she had. She tucked them into bed at night. She made them breakfast in the morning. She tried to make that house feel like a home, even though something in the walls resisted her every effort. Their children, Dawn, 18 years old, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, John Matthew, 9, and then there was Ronald DeFeo Jr., 23 years old, the oldest, the one they called Butch. The family had lived in the house on Ocean Avenue for less than 3 years, and they moved there in 1971, excited by the opportunity to own such a substantial home, to live in a good neighborhood, to give their children space to grow and play and dream. They didn't know what they were moving into. How could they? November 13th, 1974 was a Wednesday, a normal day, or so it seemed. The sun rose, people went to work and school. Leaves fell from trees. The world turned as it always had. Inside the house, the family went through their routines. Ronald Sr. went to work at his car dealership. Louise tended to the house. The children attended school, played, bickered the way siblings do. There was no warning, no omen, no sign that this would be the last day they would ever see. As evening fell, the family gathered for dinner. Did they eat together around the dining room table? Did they talk about their days? Did Louise serve something she had cooked with care, hoping to bring the family together for just a little while? We don't know these details. They've been lost to time and tragedy. What we do know is that sometime after dinner, the family went to their separate rooms. Ronald Sr. and Louise to the master bedroom at the end of the hall, Dawn to her room, Allison and Mark to their shared bedroom, John Matthew to his. They prepared for bed. They brushed their teeth. They put on pajamas. They said goodnight, or perhaps they didn't. Perhaps there had been an argument. Perhaps there was tension in the house, the kind that builds up in families living too close together, stepping on each other's nerves day after day after day. And then they slept. Around 3:15 in the morning, something happened. Something that would scar that house forever, that would stain its walls with a horror so profound that it could never be washed away. Ronald DeFeo Jr. took a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. He moved through the house, through the dark hallways that should have been filled with the soft sounds of his family sleeping, and he entered each room, one by one. He shot his father first, then his mother. Ronald and Louise DeFeo, lying in their bed, were shot at close range. 2 bullets each. The sound must have been deafening. The Marlin is not a quiet weapon. It roars when it fires, a crack that should have woken the entire neighborhood. But no one woke. No one heard. Or if they did, they stayed in their beds, pulling their covers tighter, telling themselves it was just a car backfiring, just fireworks, just anything other than what it actually was. Butch moved to the next room, and the next, and the next. One by one, he murdered his siblings as they lay in their beds. Dawn, Allison, Mark, John Matthew, children. Babies, some of them, barely into their teenage years. The official report states that all 6 family members were found lying face down on their beds, all of them shot in the back, as if they had been sleeping when it happened, as if they never woke, never turned, never tried to run or fight or scream. This detail has haunted investigators for decades. How is it possible that no one woke, that no one heard the first shots and tried to escape? The Marlin rifle is loud, impossibly loud in the confined space of a bedroom. The first shot should have woken everyone in the house. They should have been running, screaming, trying to get away, but they didn't. They stayed in their beds, face down, as if held there by some invisible force, as if something prevented them from moving, from waking, from saving themselves. Some have suggested they were drugged, that Butch put something in their food at dinner, something to make them sleep so deeply that even gunshots couldn't rouse them. But no evidence of drugs was found in their systems during the autopsies. Others say it was the house, that the house itself wanted this to happen, that it held them there, paralyzed in their sleep, so that the ritual could be completed. 6 sacrifices. 6 souls to feed whatever darkness lived in those walls. When the sun rose on November 14th, the house looked the same as it always had. The same dark shingles, the same watching windows, the same red door. But inside, the DeFeo family lay dead. It's their blood soaking into mattresses. Their lives ended in violence and darkness and terrible, inexplicable silence. Butch showed up at a local bar that evening, wild-eyed and panicked, screaming that someone had murdered his family. The police came. They entered the house. They found the bodies. And Ronald DeFeo Jr. was arrested, eventually confessing to the murders, though his story would change multiple times over the years. At trial, he claimed he heard voices that commanded him to kill, voices that came from the house itself, whispering in his mind, telling him that his family needed to die, that it was necessary, that it was part of something larger than he could understand. The jury didn't believe him. He was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison, where he remained until his death in 2021. But the house was just getting started. Imagine the house in the days and weeks after the murders, empty now, quiet. The police had finished their investigation. The bodies had been removed. The blood had been cleaned, though some say no amount of cleaning could truly erase it. Blood has a way of seeping deep, deeper than you can reach with soap and water. It gets into the grain of the wood. It stains the very molecules of the place where it was spilled. The house stood vacant, for sale. And who would want to buy a house where 6 people had been murdered in their sleep? Who would want to raise children in those rooms, cook meals in that kitchen, sleep in those beds? The price dropped, and dropped again, from $80,000 to $65,000. A steal, really, for a house of that size in that location. It's a bargain that should have raised red flags, should have made any sane person ask why it was being sold so cheaply. But bargains have a way of blinding us to danger. We see the price tag, and our brains start calculating what we could do with all that extra space, all that saved money. We tell ourselves that the past is the past, that what happened there has nothing to do with us, that we would be different, that we would be safe. The house waited, patient. It had time. It always had time. And then, on December 18th, 1975, just 13 months after the murders, a family pulled up to that house in a moving truck. A father, a mother, and 3 children. The Lutzes. George and Kathy Lutz, along with Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage. Daniel, 9 years old. Christopher, 7. And Melissa, 5. They knew about the murders, and they had been told. The real estate agent was legally required to disclose it. But George Lutz was a practical man. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses or houses that could be evil. It was just a building, he thought. Just wood and brick and glass. What happened to the DeFeos was a tragedy, yes, but it was a human tragedy, the result of one disturbed young man's violent breakdown. It had nothing to do with the house itself. Kathy was less certain. She felt something when she first walked through the front door, she later said. A coldness, a sense of being watched, but she trusted her husband. She wanted to believe him. And the house was so beautiful, so spacious. They could never afford anything like this otherwise. The price was too good to pass up. They moved in on December 18th, 1975. 28 days later, they fled, while taking only what they could carry, leaving most of their possessions behind, never to return. What happened in those 28 days has been debated, analysed, questioned, and disputed for nearly 50 years. Some say it was all a hoax, a scheme to make money from books and movies. Others insist that every word of the Lutz family's account is true, that they experienced something in that house that defies rational explanation. But whether you believe them or not, one thing is certain. After the Lutzes left, no family ever stayed in that house for very long. Owners came and went. Some stayed months, some stayed years, but none of them felt comfortable there. None of them felt safe. The house continues to watch, continues to wait, continues to breathe its slow, patient breaths. December 18th, 1975. Moving day, and the Lutz family's first night in their new home. There's something about a first night in a new house, the unfamiliarity of it, the strange sounds that every building makes, the settling of floors, the creaking of walls, the wind moving through spaces you haven't learned yet. It's normal to feel a little uneasy, a little displaced. You're sleeping in a room that doesn't feel like yours yet. You're surrounded by boxes and chaos and the debris of transition. But what the Lutzes felt on that first night was not normal unease. George later described waking in the middle of the night to a sound, not a creak or a groan, but something else. A rhythmic sound, like breathing. Heavy, laboured breathing coming from somewhere in the room. He sat up in bed, listening, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. From the walls, from the floor, from the very air itself. He got up and checked the house, walked through the dark hallways looking into the children's rooms, making sure they were safe. They were all sleeping. The house was quiet. He went back to bed, telling himself it was nothing, just his imagination, just the stress of moving, just the knowledge of what had happened there playing tricks on his mind. But the breathing continued, low and steady, in and out, like the house itself was alive and sleeping beside them. Kathy felt the cold. Even though it was December, even though cold was expected, this was different. This was a cold that seemed to bypass her skin and go straight to her bones. A cold that made her teeth chatter and her hands shake. She got up and checked the thermostat. It was set to a normal temperature. The heating system was working fine. But the cold remained, settling over her like a blanket made of ice. In the morning, they told themselves it was nothing. First night jitters. They were exhausted from moving. Their minds were playing tricks on them. They had known about the murders, and that knowledge had planted seeds of fear that were now sprouting in the dark. But the second night was worse, and the third night worse still. And by the end of the first week, they knew something was very, very wrong. Let me describe for you what it's like to live in a haunted house. Not the Hollywood version, with flickering lights and slamming doors and spectres floating through walls. But the real thing, the slow, creeping horror of realizing that the place you're supposed to feel safest is actually the most dangerous place you could be. It starts small. A door you're certain you closed is now open. A smell that appears and disappears without explanation. A sense of being watched that you can't shake, no matter how many times you tell yourself you're alone. And then it escalates. Kathy began waking up at 3:15 a.m. every single night. Exactly 3:15. The approximate time that the DeFeo murders had taken place. She didn't set an alarm. She didn't mean to wake. But her eyes would snap open in the darkness, and she would lie there, her heart pounding, feeling the weight of something standing at the foot of her bed. She never saw it clearly. It was more of a darkness within the darkness, a shape that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and a presence that radiated malevolence so intense she could taste it, bitter and metallic on her tongue. George changed. The easygoing, practical man who had scoffed at the idea of ghosts became withdrawn. Angry. He stopped going to work. He stopped shaving. He would spend hours sitting in the living room, staring at the fireplace, feeding log after log into the flames because no matter how hot the fire burned, he couldn't get warm. The cold had gotten into him, into his bones, into his soul. The children began having nightmares. All three of them, every night. They would wake screaming about things in their rooms, things with red eyes, things that whispered their names, things that promised to hurt them if they told anyone what they had seen. Melissa, the youngest, began talking to an invisible friend. A pig, she said. A giant pig that lived in her room and told her secrets. This might have been dismissed as a normal childhood imagining, except for one detail. Melissa had never been told about the pig. You see, during the police investigation of the DeFeo murders, Ronald DeFeo Jr. had claimed that a demonic pig creature named Jody had commanded him to kill his family. This detail was not widely publicized. It certainly wasn't something a 5-year-old girl would have known about. But Melissa knew. Somehow, she knew. And she talked to Jody every night. Kathy would hear footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving from room to room. She would get up to investigate and find nothing. The hallway would be empty. But the sound would continue. Footsteps that had no source. Walking through walls. Pacing. Pacing. Always pacing. And George discovered the red room in the basement. That hidden chamber painted entirely in red. He stood at the entrance, staring into it, feeling a wrongness emanate from it like heat from an oven. The temperature inside that room was always warmer than the rest of the house, noticeably warmer, as if something in there was generating heat, as if something was alive. Their dog refused to go near the basement stairs. It would growl and bark and back away. its tail between its legs, every hair on its body standing on end. Animals know. They can sense things we can't. And their dog sensed that whatever was in the basement was not something it wanted to meet. Flies appeared, hundreds of them, thousands. They clustered on the windows of one particular room, the sewing room on the second floor. Dead flies carpeted the windowsill. But where were they coming from? It was December, the middle of winter. There should be no flies. Yet they kept coming, wave after wave of them, as if the house was generating them from nothing, as if they were crawling out of the very walls. There's a theory in psychology about how environments can hold emotional imprints. Places where terrible things have happened can somehow retain the echo of that trauma, playing it back to anyone sensitive enough to perceive it. It's not supernatural, this theory suggests. It's just energy, emotion solidified and embedded in the physical space. But what the Lutzes experienced felt more intelligent than an echo, more purposeful, more alive. Kathy began to see things, not out of the corner of her eye, but directly, when she was wide awake and stone-cold sober. She saw a woman in white walking through the living room. She saw shadows move across walls when there was nothing to cast them. She saw shapes that defied description, things that her mind couldn't quite process, geometries that shouldn't exist. And she saw the eyes, those terrible red eyes that her daughter had described. They would appear in the darkness, floating at roughly the height where a person's eyes would be, glowing with an inner light that was not fire and not electricity, but something else entirely, something cold and ancient and utterly inhuman. George tried to fight back. He tried to assert his will over the house, to claim it as his own, to make it submit to his authority as the man of the family, the provider, the protector. But the house didn't care about his authority. It laughed at his attempts to control it. He would find himself in rooms with no memory of how he got there. Time would slip and slide around him. He would sit down to read the newspaper, and when he looked up again, hours had passed, though it felt like only minutes. Or the reverse would happen. He would experience what felt like hours of terror compressed into moments. The house was playing with time, playing with reality, playing with them. Father Mancuso, a Catholic priest and friend of the family, came to bless the house. He thought perhaps a blessing, a little holy water, a few prayers would drive out whatever darkness had taken root there. He had performed blessings before. It was a routine part of his duties. He expected no trouble. He got trouble. The moment he entered the house, he felt a voice inside his mind. Not a voice he heard with his ears, but a voice that bypassed all his senses and spoke directly into his consciousness. "Get out," it said, not shouted, whispered, but the whisper was more terrifying than any scream. He tried to ignore it. He sprinkled holy water. He began the prayers. And then he was overcome with a wave of nausea so intense he thought he might die. His stomach cramped. His vision blurred. He could barely breathe. He fled the house and vomited in the yard, his body rejecting not just his last meal, but the very presence of whatever lived in those walls. Later, he tried to call the Lutzes to check on them. Every time he dialed their number, the line would go dead, or strange sounds would come through the receiver. Hissing, growling, breathing. He developed painful blisters on his palms, stigmata-like wounds that appeared without cause and refused to heal. When he tried to return to the house for a second blessing, his car broke down on the way there. And when he finally made it, the front door refused to open. It was unlocked, not jammed, but it simply wouldn't budge, as if the house itself was refusing to let him in. The message was clear. He was not welcome. The house wanted him gone. Children are more sensitive to these things than adults. Their minds are more open, less constrained by rationality and skepticism. They believe in monsters because, on some level, they understand that monsters are real. Daniel, Christopher, and Melissa Lutz were living in a nightmare, and there was no waking up. Daniel's room was on the second floor, the same floor where the DeFeo children had been murdered. He would lie in bed at night, trying to sleep, trying to ignore the sounds. But the sounds wouldn't be ignored. Scratching in the walls, something with claws, moving through the spaces between the rooms, scraping against wood and plaster as it went. Sometimes it sounded small, like a rat or a squirrel. Other times it sounded massive, like something much too large to fit in those narrow spaces, but fitting anyway, compressing itself to move through impossible gaps. He would hear whispers. Children's voices, he thought, though he couldn't make out the words. They sounded sad, lost, afraid. Were they the DeFeo children? Were their spirits trapped in the house, unable to move on, forced to relive their deaths over and over? Or was the house itself creating these sounds, using the memory of their voices to torment the living? Christopher's bed would shake at night, not violently, but rhythmically, as if someone was standing at the foot of it, rocking it back and forth, back and forth. The movement was gentle, almost soothing, which somehow made it worse, because it meant whatever was doing this had control. It wasn't a mindless force. It was choosing to be gentle. It could be violent if it wanted, but it was holding back, playing with him. He would pull the covers over his head and squeeze his eyes shut and pray for morning to come. And eventually it would. The sun would rise. The shaking would stop. He would go downstairs and pretend everything was fine because what else could he do? Who would believe him? Melissa talked to Jody constantly, her pig friend who lived in the house. She would sit in her room, having conversations with something no one else could see. And when her parents asked her what Jody looked like, she would describe it in detail. It was huge, she said, as big as the room. It had red eyes that glowed in the dark. It had a smell like rotting meat and sulfur. It told her things, secrets about the house, about what happened before the DeFeos, about what wanted to happen again. George and Kathy tried to keep the children away from the house as much as possible, sending them to neighbours, to relatives, anywhere but home. But they always had to come back. And the house was always waiting. The basement beckons. Of all the spaces in that house, the basement was the worst. Everyone who entered it felt it. The wrongness was concentrated there, like the basement was the heart of whatever evil had infected the building, pumping darkness up through the floors, through the walls, into every room. George found himself drawn to the basement against his will. He would be upstairs, doing something ordinary, and then he would realize he was standing at the basement door. He had no memory of walking there, no memory of deciding to go. But there he was, his hand on the doorknob, about to descend into the dark. The red room fascinated and repelled him in equal measure. He wanted to understand it. He wanted to know what it was for, who had built it, why it was painted that colour, why it radiated heat when everything else in the basement was cold. He stood in the doorway and stared into it, and sometimes, for just a moment, he thought he saw things, shapes moving in the shadows, faces forming in the red paint on the walls, symbols that would disappear the moment he tried to focus on them. Kathy refused to go down there. She would do anything, go anywhere in the house, except the basement. The pull was too strong. She could feel it calling to her, trying to draw her down into the dark. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that if she went down there, If she entered that red room, something terrible would happen. She would not come back out. Or if she did, she would not be herself anymore. The house wanted them in the basement, wanted them in that red room. It whispered to them at night, suggestions planted in their dreams, urging them to go down, to see, to enter, to become part of whatever waited there. Psychics and paranormal investigators who have studied the case believe the Red Room was some kind of portal, a thin place where the barrier between our world and something else is permeable. They suggest that rituals might have been performed there, and ceremonies designed to open doors that should remain closed, to invite things into our reality that should stay in theirs. But who performed these rituals? The DeFeos claimed they knew nothing about the room, that they had never seen it, never knew it was there. So who built it? Who painted it red? Who used it for whatever dark purpose it was created for? The house doesn't answer these questions. It only smiles its red door smile and waits for the next family, the next victims, the next souls to feed its insatiable hunger. Watch a man break down. Watch him lose himself, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but a hollow shell walking around in his skin. That's what happened to George Lutz in those 28 days. He stopped going to work, called in sick, then stopped calling at all. His business, which he had built up over years, began to fall apart. He didn't care. He couldn't make himself care about anything except the house and the cold and the terrible presence that pressed down on him every moment of every day. He stopped sleeping, or when he did sleep, he had nightmares so vivid and horrifying that waking was almost a relief. He dreamed of the DeFeo murders, dreamed he was there, watching, unable to stop what was happening. Or worse, dreamed he was the one pulling the trigger, feeling the rifle kick against his shoulder, seeing the blood spray across the wall. He would wake gasping, covered in sweat despite the bone-deep cold that never left him. And Kathy would be awake beside him, because she had been having the same dream, the exact same dream. How is that possible? How can two people share the same nightmare, unless it wasn't a dream at all? Unless it was a memory, the house's memory, playing back for them what it had witnessed, forcing them to experience it, to live through it, to become part of its history. George began to resemble Ronald DeFeo Sr. physically. He was growing a beard, letting his hair grow out. And when Kathy looked at photographs of the murdered father, she saw her husband staring back at her. The same facial hair, the same exhausted eyes, the same defeated posture. It was as if the house was trying to recreate the conditions of the murders, trying to set the stage for a repeat performance, trying to make George into Ronald, to make the Lutz family into the DeFeo family, so that history could repeat itself, so that 6 more people could die and feed whatever dark hunger lived in those walls. George felt it, the urge, the terrible, intrusive thoughts that would pop into his head unbidden. Thoughts about hurting his family. Thoughts about the rifle. Where could he get a rifle? How would it feel in his hands? Would it be quick? Would they suffer? He was horrified by these thoughts. They weren't his. He loved his family. He would never hurt them. But the thoughts kept coming, stronger each day, more insistent, until he wasn't sure anymore what was his own mind and what was being planted there by something else. He confided in Kathy, told her what he was thinking, told her he was afraid of himself, afraid of what he might do if they stayed in the house one more day. That's when they knew they had to leave. Immediately, before it was too late. Before George became someone else entirely. Before the house completed its transformation of them. January 14th, 1976. And 28 days after they moved in. Their last night in the house on Ocean Avenue. They had decided to leave. They had made the decision that morning, speaking in hushed whispers as if afraid the house might hear and prevent their escape. They would pack what they could and go. They would stay with Kathy's mother until they could figure out what to do next. The house could keep their furniture, their belongings, everything. They just needed to get out. But they made one mistake. They decided to spend one more night there. Just one more night. To pack properly. To make sure they had everything they needed. One more night. It was the longest night of their lives. The activity in the house reached a fever pitch, as if it knew they were leaving and was making one final attempt to keep them there, in order to destroy them before they could escape. Doors slammed with such force that the walls shook, not just closing, but slamming, over and over, the sound echoing through the house like gunshots, like the sound of the Marlin rifle firing. Bang, bang, bang. Windows rattled in their frames. Glass cracked. One of the upstairs windows shattered for no reason at all. Glass exploding outward into the night air as if something inside was trying to break free. The temperature dropped so low they could see their breath. Their fingers went numb. Their lips turned blue. No matter how high they turned the heat, no matter how many fires George built, the cold remained. The cold was everywhere. The cold was everything. And then they heard the marching band. This detail is one of the strangest in the entire account. The Lutzes claimed that on their final night in the house, they heard what sounded like a marching band playing outside. Tubas, drums, trumpets. A full band, loud and raucous, playing in the middle of the night in their quiet suburban neighborhood. George went to the window to look. The street was empty. There was no band. But the music continued, loud and clear, for several minutes before fading away into silence. Was it a hallucination? A shared delusion brought on by stress and fear and sleeplessness? Or did the house show them this? A final, bizarre flourish, a way of demonstrating that it could control their perceptions, that it could make them see and hear anything it wanted. Kathy saw the demon. She won't describe it in detail. Even years later, when she talked about her experiences in the house, she would not describe what she saw that night. She would only say that it was large, that it was demonic, that it radiated such pure malevolence that she thought she would die from fear alone. It appeared at the foot of their bed. It stood there, watching them. And then it moved toward them. That's when George grabbed Kathy and the children and ran. They ran out of the house in the middle of the night, in their pajamas, leaving the front door wide open behind them. They didn't stop to pack. They didn't stop to lock up. They just ran, piling into the car and driving away as fast as they could. Kathy looking back at the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following them, reaching out with impossibly long arms to drag them back. But the house let them go. It had fed on their fear for 28 days. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it was satisfied. Or perhaps it simply knew that it could wait. There would be other families, other victims. The house had time. It always had time. The Lutzes never went back. They sent movers to collect their belongings. They refused to set foot on that property ever again. The 28 days they spent at 112 Ocean Avenue nearly destroyed them, nearly cost them their sanity, their family, their lives. But they survived. They got out. Not everyone who enters that house is so lucky. In the decades since the Lutzes fled, people have tried to explain what happened in that house. They've offered theories, examined evidence, debated, argued, analyzed. But no theory fully explains everything. No single explanation accounts for all the strange details, or all the impossible occurrences. Let's examine the theories one by one. Let's look at what might have been happening in that house, or what might still be happening. Theory 1. Demonic possession. The Catholic Church takes demonic possession seriously. It has protocols, procedures, trained exorcists who deal with cases of suspected possession. And when church authorities examined the case of the Amityville house, many of them came away convinced that a demon, or multiple demons, had indeed taken up residence there. The signs were all there, the crosses turning upside down on the walls, the religious imagery being defaced, the resistance to blessing and holy water, the way Father Mancuso was driven from the house, his body rebelling against the evil within. Demons, according to church teaching, they can attach themselves to places as well as people, and a place where terrible violence has occurred, where blood has been spilled and lives have been taken, can become a kind of beacon, drawing demonic entities to it, like moths to a flame. The DeFeo murders could have opened a door, could have created a spiritual wound in that location, a tear in the fabric of reality through which something dark and ancient could crawl into our world. And once it was here, it would not leave willingly. It had found a home. It had found a place where it could feed on fear and pain and terror for as long as the house still stood. But if it was a demon, why that house specifically? Why not any of the other houses where murders have occurred? What made this location special? What made it vulnerable to possession when thousands of other crime scenes remain merely sad, not supernatural? The theory is compelling. It fits many of the facts, but it doesn't answer all the questions. Theory 2. The Native American burial ground. This theory has become almost a cliché in horror stories. A house built on an Indian burial ground, disturbing the dead, bringing down a curse. It's been used so often that it's easy to dismiss it as fiction, as lazy storytelling. But there is historical evidence that the land where the Amityville house stands was once used by Native Americans. The Shinnecock and Montauk tribes inhabited the area for thousands of years before European colonization. And while there's no definitive proof of a burial ground at that exact location, the possibility cannot be entirely dismissed. In many cultures, disturbing the dead is considered one of the gravest offences you can commit. The dead deserve respect. Their resting places are sacred, and if you violate that sanctity, if you build on top of their bones, the consequences can be severe. Could the house be suffering from a curse? Could the spirits of those buried beneath be angry at the intrusion, at the disrespect shown to their final resting place? Could they be lashing out at anyone who dares to live on their land? The Lutzes reported finding what appeared to be a well or a pit in the basement beneath the Red Room. They never excavated it, never tried to discover what was at the bottom. But some theorists suggest that this pit might have been a burial site, that human remains might lie beneath the house, trapped and disturbed, unable to rest. If this is true, if there are bones beneath the house, then perhaps what the families experienced was not a demon, but the rage of the violated dead. Spirits who wanted nothing more than to be left in peace, but instead found themselves beneath the foundations of a building, crushed under concrete and wood, unable to escape. But again, this theory has problems. Why would Native American spirits manifest in the way they did? The red eyes, the demonic imagery, the specific persecution of the Catholic priest. These don't align with typical accounts of Native American hauntings, which tend to be more subtle, more focused on natural elements. Still, the theory persists, and perhaps there's truth to it. Perhaps multiple factors combine to create the perfect storm of supernatural activity. Perhaps the burial ground was part of it, but not all of it. Theory 3, the Red Room rituals. The Red Room, that strange, hidden space in the basement. What was it for? Who built it? And why? Some investigators believe the room was used for occult rituals, satanic ceremonies, black magic, attempts to summon demons or other entities into our world. The color red, in many occult traditions, is associated with blood sacrifice, with violence, with dark power. There are rumors, unconfirmed, based on local gossip and whispered stories, that before the DeFeos moved in, the house was owned by people involved in the occult, that ceremonies were performed there, that the house was deliberately consecrated to dark forces, prepared as a vessel for something evil. If this is true, then the house itself could be a kind of spiritual battery, charged with dark energy through years of ritual practice. And that energy wouldn't dissipate just because the practitioners moved away or died. It would remain embedded in the walls, the floors, the very atoms of the building. The DeFeo murders could have been a result of this energy. Ronald DeFeo Jr. might have been influenced, even possessed, by the forces that had been invited into the house through ritual. His act of violence could have been an offering, a sacrifice to feed whatever lived there. And the Lutzes, moving in so soon after the murders, would have been moving into a house at the peak of its power. A house that had just been fed 6 souls and was hungry for more. This theory is dark, darker than the others, because it suggests that what happened at Amityville was not random, not accidental, but deliberate. Someone at some point chose to make that house into what it is. Someone invited the evil in and gave it a home. But who and why? These questions may never be answered. Theory 4. Psychological trauma and mass hysteria. Not all theories require the supernatural. Some researchers and skeptics argue that what the Lutzes experienced can be explained entirely through psychology. They knew about the murders before they moved in. That knowledge would have planted seeds of fear in their minds. Every strange sound, every odd smell, every coincidence could be interpreted through the lens of that fear, magnified and distorted until ordinary events seemed supernatural. The power of suggestion is real. If you believe a house is haunted, you will start to see evidence of haunting everywhere. Your mind will create patterns where none exist. It will turn the mundane into the miraculous. Furthermore, the family was under stress. They had stretched themselves financially to buy the house. George's business was struggling. Kathy was dealing with the challenges of blending a family, of raising 3 young children in a new environment. Stress can cause hallucinations. It can disrupt sleep. It can make people irritable, paranoid, even violent. Could the entire Amityville haunting have been a folie à plusieurs, a shared delusion, where one family member's fear infected the others, until they were all experiencing the same hallucinations, reinforcing each other's beliefs, creating a feedback loop of terror? It's possible. Human psychology is complex and strange. We are capable of convincing ourselves of almost anything if the conditions are right. But this theory struggles to explain certain details. The priest's experience of the photographs that came out damaged or showed strange anomalies. The testimonies of people who visited the house and felt the wrongness there. People who had no prior knowledge of the history or the Lutz's claims. Can psychology explain everything? Or is there something more going on? Something that skepticism cannot account for? Theory 5. The house as a living entity. This is perhaps the most disturbing theory of all, that the house itself is alive. Not in a biological sense, but in some other way that we don't fully understand. That it has consciousness, intention, desires. In this theory, the house is not merely a container for demonic forces or restless spirits. The house is the entity. It thinks, it feels, it hungers. Buildings can take on a kind of life. Anyone who has spent time in very old structures knows this. That they have personalities, they have moods, they respond to the people within them in ways that feel almost intentional. But the house at Amityville took this to an extreme. It became aware, perhaps through the accumulation of trauma and violence over decades, perhaps through the rituals performed in the Red Room, perhaps through some quality inherent in the land itself, something that predates human habitation. And once it became aware, it wanted to stay that way. It needed to feed. Violence and fear are its food. Negative emotions are its sustenance. And so it influences the people who live within it, pushing them toward acts that will generate more fear, more trauma, more violence. It made Ronald DeFeo Jr. kill his family, not through demonic possession, but through direct manipulation. The house's consciousness intertwining with his own, planting thoughts, eroding his will, until he became an extension of the house itself. It tried to do the same to George Lutz, tried to make him into another Ronald, tried to stage another massacre. But the Lutzes escaped before it could complete its work. And now the house waits, patient, eternal, for the next family, the next victims, the next meal. This theory is the hardest to accept because it suggests that evil can exist independent of moral agents, that a thing, an inanimate object, can choose to do harm. It violates our understanding of how the world works. But perhaps our understanding is incomplete. Perhaps there are things in this world that we cannot explain, cannot categorize, cannot control. Perhaps the house at Amityville is one of those things. Over the years, many people have investigated the Amityville house, paranormal researchers, demonologists, psychics, skeptics looking to debunk the story. All of them went in with their own theories, their own expectations, their own beliefs about what they would find. Very few of them came out unchanged. Ed and Lorraine Warren, perhaps the most famous paranormal investigators of the 20th century, visited the house shortly after the Lutzes fled. The Warrens had investigated hundreds of hauntings over their careers. They had seen possession. They had seen poltergeist activity. They had seen things that would make most people question their sanity. But Amityville shook even them. Lorraine Warren was a clairvoyant. She claimed to be able to sense spiritual presences, to communicate with the dead. When she entered the Amityville house, she was immediately overwhelmed. She described it as one of the most powerfully negative places she had ever encountered. The evil there was concentrated, she said, focused and intelligent. Ed Warren, a demonologist, took photographs inside the house. One of those photographs, taken in the darkness near the stairs, appears to show a young boy with glowing eyes peering out from a doorway. The Lutzes had no young boys in their family. The DeFeos did. John Matthew DeFeo would have been about the right age and appearance. Is the photograph evidence of a spirit? Or is it a trick of light? A coincidence? Pareidolia turning shadows into faces? The debate continues. But those who have seen the photograph cannot deny the eerie resemblance to the murdered child. The Warrens concluded that the house was demonically infested. They recommended that it never be occupied again, that it be sealed or, if possible, destroyed. Their recommendations were not followed. Other investigators have had similar experiences. sudden illnesses upon entering the house, equipment malfunctions, cameras that refuse to work, recording devices that capture nothing but static or, worse, strange voices speaking in languages no one recognizes. One team of researchers set up motion sensors and temperature gauges throughout the house. They monitored it for a week. The sensors would trigger randomly, detecting movement in empty rooms. The temperature would drop and spike without correlation to the heating system or outdoor weather. On the final night of their investigation, every piece of equipment they had set up malfunctioned simultaneously. Batteries drained, circuits fried, weeks of data were corrupted and lost. And the investigators, all of them experienced and level-headed professionals, packed up and left, refusing to discuss what they had experienced in those final hours. Why does the house resist investigation? Why does it seem to actively work against anyone trying to document or understand it? Perhaps because understanding would give us power over it. Knowledge is control. And the house does not want to be controlled. It wants to remain a mystery, a source of fear and speculation, feeding on the terror generated by those who whisper about it in the dark. The house still stands. The address has been changed. It's no longer 112 Ocean Avenue. The number was altered in an attempt to discourage curiosity seekers, to give the current owners some privacy, when to pretend that the house is just another house on just another street. But you can't hide something like this. Not really. The people who want to find it still do. Late at night, cars drive slowly past, occupants craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the infamous windows, the eyes that watch, the red door, the building where so much horror unfolded. The current owners, whoever they are, and they have requested anonymity, insist that they have experienced nothing unusual. No strange sounds, no cold spots, no apparitions. They claim the house is perfectly normal, that all the stories are exaggeration or fabrication, that they sleep peacefully in the bedrooms where the DeFeos died. Should we believe them? Or are they simply trying to protect their property value, trying to live quietly without the burden of notoriety? Or, darker still, are they under the house's influence, unable to perceive what is happening around them, their minds clouded by the same force that drove Ronald DeFeo Jr. to murder? Some people who have seen the house recently report that it looks different. The iconic quarter-round windows have been modified, made to look less like eyes. The exterior has been changed, painted a different color. It's as if the house is trying to disguise itself, to hide in plain sight, to pretend it's something other than what it is. But those who know, who have studied the case, who have felt the pull of that place, they can still recognize it. The changes are superficial. Underneath, it's still the same building, still the same entity, still watching, still waiting. There are reports, unconfirmed but persistent, that the house goes through cycles and periods of quiet where nothing happens, where families live there without incident. And then, every so many years, the activity resumes. Doors slam, cold spots appear, the whispers return. Perhaps the house needs time to gather strength between feedings. Perhaps it lies dormant, conserving its energy until the right family comes along, until it senses vulnerability, fear, trauma that it can exploit and amplify. Or perhaps it's always active, always hungry, but it's learned to be more subtle. The Lutz case brought too much attention. Media coverage, investigations, books and movies. The house became too famous, too scrutinized. Now it operates more quietly, influencing its occupants in ways they don't recognize, leading them to small acts of cruelty and violence that never make the news, never become part of the legend, but feed it nonetheless. The Amityville Horror has become part of our cultural consciousness. It's spawned books, movies, documentaries. It's become a reference point, a shorthand for houses that are more than just buildings, for places where the boundary between our world and something darker has worn thin. But the real legacy is not in the media it has generated. The real legacy is in the lives it has affected, the families who have lived there and what they have endured. The DeFeos, dead and gone, their story ended in violence and tragedy. The Lutzes, who survived but were never the same, who carried the weight of those 28 days for the rest of their lives. George Lutz spent years talking about his experiences, trying to warn people, trying to make them understand that what happened was real. He was mocked, accused of lying, of fabricating the whole thing for money. The skeptics pointed out inconsistencies in his story, moments where details changed or contradicted earlier accounts. But trauma does that. Trauma fragments memory. It makes it hard to recall events in perfect sequence, in perfect detail. And perhaps some of the inconsistencies were the result of the house itself, of time and reality bending around him while he was there, making it impossible to give a coherent account afterward. Kathy Lutz maintained until her death that everything they said was true. She never wavered. She never recanted. Even when it would have been easier to admit it was a hoax to make the controversy go away, she stood by her story. She knew what she had experienced. She knew what that house had tried to do to her family. The children, now adults, have largely stayed quiet. And they give occasional interviews, but they seem reluctant to discuss the details. The trauma is still there, still fresh, even decades later. You can see it in their eyes when they talk about the house. The fear is real. Whatever happened to them in those 28 days left scars that have never fully healed. And what about Ronald DeFeo Jr.? He died in prison in 2021. His sentence for the murder of his family finally ended by death itself. He never showed remorse. He never fully explained why he did what he did. His story changed over the years, from claiming he heard voices to suggesting that his sister Dawn was the real killer to insisting that it was all a mob hit. But in his final years, he stopped talking about it. He retreated into silence. And those who spoke with him said he seemed haunted, not by guilt, but by something else, or by the memory of that night, by whatever he had experienced in the house, by the possibility that he had not acted alone, that something had used him, had moved through him to commit those terrible acts. Did he know the truth? Did he understand what had really happened? Or did the house keep its secrets even from him? Its first instrument, its first weapon. We'll never know. He took whatever he knew to his grave. Let me ask you something. Let me pose some questions that have no comfortable answers. If the Amityville Horror was a hoax, why did the Lutzes abandon a house they had just bought, taking a massive financial loss? Why did they leave behind most of their possessions? Why did they live in relative poverty afterward, moving from place to place, never settling, never comfortable, or as if they were running from something they could never escape? If it was a hoax, why did Father Mancuso corroborate their story? Why did a Catholic priest, a man with a reputation to protect, publicly state that he had experienced something supernatural in that house? What did he have to gain from lying? If it was a hoax, why have other people who have lived in the house, people who had no connection to the Lutzes, reported similar experiences? Not all of them, certainly. But enough. Enough that the pattern is hard to dismiss. And here's the question that truly haunts me. If it wasn't a hoax, if everything the Lutzes said was true, then what does that mean? What does it tell us about the world we live in? It means that evil can have a home, a physical place where it dwells and waits. It means that some places are corrupted beyond redemption, that no amount of blessing or cleansing or renovation can purge what has taken root there. It means that houses can be alive, that they can think and feel and want, that they can hunger for our fear, our pain, our suffering. It means that we are not as safe as we think we are, that the walls around us, the roofs over our heads, the foundations beneath our feet might not be protecting us at all. They might be cages. They might be keeping us in, not keeping danger out. Think about your own home. Think about the sounds it makes at night when you're trying to sleep. The creaks and groans and settling noises. Are you sure that's all they are? Are you certain your house is just a building? Just an assembly of materials with no consciousness, no will of its own? How would you know if it was more than that? How would you recognize the signs before it was too late? It's 3 a.m. again. The same hour we started with. The hour when the world feels thinnest, when the barrier between what is and what should not be becomes permeable. Picture yourself standing outside the house now. You've heard the whole story. You know what happened there. You know about the murders, the haunting, the terror that has seeped into every board and nail. The house stands before you in the darkness. The windows catch the light from the street lamp, and yes, they look like eyes. They are eyes. They're watching you right now, assessing you, measuring you, deciding whether you would make a good meal, or whether you're too aware, too prepared, too difficult to break. You can feel it pulling at you, can't you? Or the curiosity, the desire to know more, to go inside, to see for yourself what all the fuss is about. You're not like the others, you think. You're stronger, smarter. You wouldn't fall for the tricks the house plays. You would be fine, but that's what they all thought. The DeFeos, the Lutzes, everyone who ever walked through that red door thinking they would be the exception, thinking the rules didn't apply to them. The house has patience. It will wait for you. It will wait for anyone foolish enough or curious enough or desperate enough to give it a chance. And if you do go inside, if you cross that threshold and enter those rooms, what will you find? Will you experience the same things the others did? The cold spots, the voices, the presence that watches from the shadows, the red eyes glowing in the dark? Or will the house show you something new, something tailored specifically to you? It knows you now. It's been listening to this entire story along with you. It knows your fears, your weaknesses, the things that make you vulnerable. It will use them against you. Here is what I believe. Here is the truth as I understand it after all my research, all my investigation, all my careful consideration of the evidence. The Amityville Horror is real, not necessarily in every detail. Memory is unreliable. Trauma distorts. The human mind fills in gaps and creates narratives that make sense, even when the underlying events are chaotic and inexplicable. But the core of it, the essential truth, is real. Something evil exists in that house. Whether it's a demon or a collection of restless spirits, or the house itself having become conscious and malevolent, I cannot say. Perhaps it's all of these things. Perhaps it's something we don't have words for, something that exists outside our ability to categorize and understand. The DeFeo murders happened. 6 people died. That is fact, not speculation. And something in that house affected Ronald DeFeo Jr. in the days and weeks leading up to those murders. Something planted the seeds of violence in his mind and nurtured them until they grew into action. The Lutzes experienced something in those 28 days. Something that terrified them so profoundly that they were willing to abandon everything to escape. That cannot be faked. Terror of that magnitude leaves a mark. You can see it in their faces, hear it in their voices, and even decades later, And the house continues. It stands, it watches, it waits. That is the most frightening thing of all. Not the past horrors, terrible though they were, but the knowledge that it's not over. The house is still there. It will always be there. And as long as it stands, as long as those walls remain upright and that roof keeps out the rain, the possibility exists for it to happen again. Some evils cannot be defeated. They can only be avoided, contained, outlasted. The house at Amityville is one such evil. I told you at the beginning that some stories, once heard, cannot be unheard, that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. You have heard this story now. You have opened this door. The knowledge of what exists at 112 Ocean Avenue, or whatever address they're calling it this week, is inside you now. It will stay there. Late at night, when your own house makes strange sounds, you'll think of this story. You'll wonder, you'll question. That's what the house wants. It feeds on fear, remember, and you don't have to be inside it to feel fear. The story itself is a kind of contagion, spreading from person to person, keeping the house alive in our collective consciousness, giving it power even at a distance. Perhaps you'll visit Amityville someday. Perhaps you'll drive down Ocean Avenue looking for the house, wanting to see it with your own eyes. If you do, be careful. Don't stare too long at those windows. Don't let the house get a good look at you. And whatever you do, don't go inside. Because once you cross that threshold, you become part of its story. You become another character in the endless horror that plays out in those rooms. And the house does not let its characters go easily. The sun will rise soon. Morning will come. And in the daylight, this will all seem less frightening, less real. You'll go about your day, and the house will fade from your thoughts, becoming just another scary story you heard once. But tonight, when darkness falls again, when you're alone in your room and the world is quiet and still, you'll remember. You'll think of the house with eyes. You'll think of the red door. You'll think of the breathing sounds in the walls, and you'll wonder if it's thinking of you too. The house at Amityville is real. It stands. It watches. It waits. And it will always, always be hungry.